Let's invite our training panelists to the virtual stage. Marc Parent, the CEO of Commissionaires du Québec, Stéphane Vachon-Zy, who is a patrol sergeant and public safety unit training sergeant, Michael McKenzie, a field training and academy lieutenant with the Orange County Sheriff's Office in Florida, and Steve Nash, who is a teacher, mentor, and trainer. Over the last few years, police departments have been called on to update the training they provide for their officers. Deciding how to change the training or when to implement the new updates have posed challenges for many agencies. As in our morning discussion, each panelist will have a few minutes to speak, and once we've heard from all four panelists, we'll open it up to a general discussion with our remaining time. Before we get started, I'll share a brief introduction for each of our panelists. After a successful 31 years with the Service de Police de la Ville de Montréal, including 5 years as chief, Marc Parent joined Commissionaires du Québec in August 2015 as the CEO. He has an in-depth understanding of social and work environments, and he is a driving force in promoting high-performance cultures that leads to an adaptive capacity to act. Stéphane Vachon-Zy is currently assigned as a patrol sergeant, public safety unit training sergeant and lead coordinator, and public safety unit tactical advisor for a major city police service in the province of Alberta. Stéphane has held many different titles during his career, and throughout these assignments, he has taught various disciplines and is currently focusing on instructor development and supervisory training as it relates to crowd management, crowd control, and the public safety unit. Also joining our panel today is Michael McKenzie, who is employed with the Orange County Sheriff's Office in Florida as the field training and academy lieutenant assigned to the training section. Lieutenant McKenzie is also a retired United States Navy Chief Petty Officer, serving both active duty and reserves for 22 years. While on active duty Navy, he was the course manager and lead instructor for the U.S. Navy Military Police Academy, earning his Master Training Specialist designation and Law Enforcement Teaching Certificate. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Steve Nash, who is a full spectrum teacher, mentor, and trainer who has spent the last 35 years engaging with individuals and teams seeking to maximize their awareness, performance, and long-term success. His background experience includes almost 25 years as a military officer and commander, serving at home and abroad in the Royal Canadian Regiment, the Canadian Airborne Regiment, the UK Parachute Regiment, and Canadian Special Operations Forces Command. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Marc, I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Brittany. So I will talk about the community of practice, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that with you. We can go on. What I was thinking when we asked me to share with you the new approach and innovation in training, I thought that use of force will be a main topic and a good, I would say, subject to address because of the challenges associated to that. So we can, yeah, you can go to the other one. Thank you, Brittany. So a few, the agenda for the presentation, and I'll try to make sure to address all the main things that I would like to share with you in 10 minutes, which is not that much, but I do my best to respect the time for the other presentators, other speakers. So next, please. A quick review. It's not about me, but just to understand why, for me, it was a main topic that I wanted to address. I spent 31 years in an organization, but at the end of that, you have to understand that Montreal PD is 4,500 sworn officers. It's a big city. I consider that the city of Montreal is very diverse, and it's 2 million citizens, I would say, a cosmopolitan city. And the challenges related to that are, it's a number of challenges that we have to adapt to every community. I did a quick passage in the SWAT team for 5 years. And when I came back in the line of duty in the first line, I realized at that moment that the training was a big issue for I would say our people doing calls in a regular basis, but we're not able to have a daily training as specialized unit have. And when I came as a lieutenant on the field, I really said to myself that the new mission for me will be to bring this capacity or capability to the first people on the line to be well trained and better trained. While I was doing this, I was also doing my master degree. And why I'm sharing that with you, I was doing it in learning organization, and I was trying a way to bring that knowledge and learning in the practical side of my role as a leader. Next, please. So we all know about the fact that use of force very often is a very sensitive topic, and very often also police officers that will have to intervene are going through a big stress, and with also today the social media and the pressure from the society about the what we asking us to do in very in a complex role, a complex word. It's very hard for the police officer to adapt to that. So I think the main goal of the or the end goal of the learning is to be able to give to our officers and policemen on the field the better training as much as we can. Next, please. The learning in any kind of organization, but today we're talking about law enforcement, can be various way of doing it. But I think that if we can integrate all the, I would say the way of learning in a way to better integrate the learning from the people that we work with, from also by the training unit that we can have in our organization, depending on the size. Now we have IT capacity, so the e-learning and all the learning from experience can be sometimes good, sometimes maybe not that good. So how can we make sure that all the learning that we are providing can go through value-based and also ethical-based for the organization? Next, please. So today I want to talk to you about community of practice. Just a quick definition. It's about sharing knowledge with the people that are sharing maybe a passion or an interest in any kind of topics. Today we're going to talk about use of force, of course, but it's a way of sharing best practices among people that are working together. We know that when you have a more, I would say, a professoral or a academic approach of teaching, only 10% of what we're going to learn will be transferred in a workplace. So this is why how the learning of the tacit or the experiential that you are providing to the people will be much more would say the anchoring of learning will be a lot more addressed when you do it this way. In the police force also, we are more a command and control way of learning, but community of practice is about getting the people in the first line to provide best practice. So it's a bottom-up approach. It's a bottom-up way of learning, which is quite different than what we see usually. Doesn't mean that you don't have to guide them to make sure that the way it's done, it's done on the right way. We're talking about be more as a team empowerment. So you are trying to make team to learn all together, to bring that at a organizational learning. Also, you are promoting a way of adapting to the different contexts and situations that you have to learn. Next, please. A very quick words on the when we talk about tacit versus explicit. Tacit, like I said, it's something that you are learning on the street, that you are learning when you work, but the major learning that you're going to use in the regular business will be something that you learn by yourself or when you learn from others, like in community of practice. So the tacit knowledge is very much amplifies when you can share it with you, with the team, the organization, and the organization giving you the capacity or the opportunity to share that with other group of your organization. So this is also the perfect place to drill values and ethics, and how can you make sure that the vision of your organization is going to be shared among the employees. So when I came in as chief, one of the main, I would say, message that I was bringing to the police organization was the importance to be within our community. So our vision was the SPVM within its community, because we are all Montrealers, we all part of the stakeholders that want to bring values and ethics in the way that we are doing the work that we do on the field. So mainly the tacit knowledge that you are developing among the community of practice are going to be the social contract that you are doing with the community. Next, please. So you need to, of course, have some kind of success condition to do that. So you have to be a learner. You have to share those ethical dilemmas together to be able to talk about them and to understand the process behind each decision that you make. So it's also a learning that you will bring to the team and eventually to the organization. And it gives you also the opportunity to make a social contract with your community. And also within the community, you want to bring this inclusion and diversity in the way of serving the community. Next, please. I just put this picture to as an example, because all along the way of the journey, the community or the organization will reveal which of your team member connect the most with the, I would say, the purpose that you want to put in place, the purpose that inspires your team member. And I think that if you support those champions for the new vision, it will bring you in the organization reliable agents of change in the process, in the approach that you want to put on about values and ethics. And these people came to visit me like almost, I would say, 5 years after I left, to give me this kind of the 10th anniversary of the community of practice. So this is the demonstration that these people are very much involved and engaged in the process. Next, please. All units, you have to make sure that all the expertise that you have in all units can be those, I would say, champions, and have the capacity to bring and share the expertise. Next, please. So it's an executive summary of a community of practice. In Montreal, we had around 100 coaches in all units. And of course, you need to keep collaboration and communication with all the stakeholders. So the Law Enforcement National Academy, which is the Institut Police du Québec here in Montreal, Quebec. The training unit, also all the other stakeholders that can bring new learning or recommendation. The approach is about learning organization, networking, and also co-creation or co-elevation of the new learning that you are providing on the field. All the activities that were shared with the coaches was about simulations, so giving the opportunity to police officer during their regular shift to bring a simulation in the middle of a shift and make the simulation with observation and then a feedback, or right after the simulation to get some good lesson learned and feedback about what they have done. And winning condition for the community of practice is to have a leadership that believe in it and make sure that you can also drive values and ethics all around the process. And guiding principles, when we talk about guiding principles, it's about mutual support, it's about values, it's about how you can bring the good level of conversation with the troops and the police officer on the field. You have also to accept to learn from the bad and the ugly. So you need to give the opportunity to talk about those things to make sure that you won't only learn from success, but very often bad and ugly will tell you how you can change and address and also increase your capacity to be better the next day. So that will be in a 10 minutes, the kind of a wrap up of the community of practice that we put in place in Montreal a few years ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was wonderful. And now we'll go on to Stéphane Vachon-Z.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Like Brittany said, so I have been in law enforcement for the better part of 20 years. I have worked in the security industry. I've been a sworn police officer in Alberta for 16 years, and I've worked a variety of assignments, for lack of a better term, but a great deal of those assignments have included training of some sort or have included largely the realm of crowd management, public safety. And right now, my operational job is that of a patrol sergeant in the city where I work, which is just over 1 million people. One of the things that I've seen that's pretty striking to me is, I mean, I've heard a lot of people and a lot of members today talk about the challenges in policing and the things that we're going through. But what I have noticed is that at an operational level, the vast majority of our younger membership still wants to train and are very motivated in doing so. So I'll talk a little bit about that. About one of the things that I've been able to do in my career. So in 2017, I began working for Canadian Innovative Protective Solutions, so CIPS. That's a company ran by a retired sergeant from the agency I worked in. And I kind of work on a contract basis, and I'm currently the specialty training coordinator for that company. And what that company has allowed me to do is deliver the comprehensive public safety training that the company does, but in the private sector for peace officers. So for those that aren't sworn police officers, and it gives you a good and different perspective. I've trained defensive and control tactics, vehicle-related training, and of course, the specialty training that I coordinate right now is largely related to crowd management, crowd awareness. And one of the things I was able to do was to train peace officers for the city where I work, and just about all of them actually on a comprehensive program for crowd awareness. From the policing side, as was mentioned, so I work for a public safety unit where I'm the training lead coordinator and training sergeant. I'm a tactical advisor, so an operational tactical advisor to our commanders. And I've had the ability to work, the Ottawa Freedom Convoy, I'm sure as everybody's well aware of. I was deployed there. We've had a great deal of encampments that we've dealt with in the city where I work, And we've had some very, very, very good success in dealing with those. And Ottawa was another deployment that allowed us to see a multifaceted joint operational approach to successfully deal with everything that was happening. So that was very good as well, and gives you a lot more perspective when we deliver our training. One of the things that I try and do in my operational role as a patrol sergeant is, having a lot of executive members here today talk about kind of that macro view and from a large a leadership perspective for the agency. I try to focus a lot on the actual squad and the things that we can do and we can affect ourselves. I'm lucky to work in an organization where training is taken very seriously. We have a lot of opportunities for training days. We, in the organization I work in, we have 2 ranges. We have a training campus. However, we still take it upon ourselves in our own group to focus on the quality of training, not necessarily the quantity of training. And I think that's a big thing these days, because what we're seeing is a lot of challenges in policing. Use of force was mentioned in the last presentation, which I agree with. That's a huge topic of debate right now. And I think if we only rely on the organization to deliver the training that's required, I think we're going to shortchange ourselves and we're going to be disappointed. We have to look beyond that, and we have to, again, take things that are in our control or within our squad's control and build from there. One of the things that we talk about quite often in the team that I work, because we're so committed to training, is we end up we do tabletops. We do short sessions on what we call our parade. So I know in different agencies, it's a pre-work briefing. It could be roll call. And it gives us the opportunity to take that short time frame and again, focus on that quality. So we've done shooting drills. We've done vehicle stop drills. We, in the agency I work, deploying tire deflation devices. We've done training for that. We've brought in guest presenters. So we've brought in investigators from various units, from homicide to firearms units. We've had people come in that speak about Indigenous relations. So running the gambit of all sorts of topics that keep their interest, because it's not the same thing over and over again, but again, focusing on that quality. In the private sector, going back to working for SIPS, I think it gives me an opportunity to experience different perspectives from non-police organizations, but obviously that do similar work. And working with those people and those members and the different stories they have, experiences they have, areas they work. A lot of the training we do is out in rural areas with some of these organizations through SIPS. Again, allows you to be more robust and focus on that quality of training, and start to hear, again, different perspectives that they may have. I think, there's not a lot of time today, but when you talk about the future of training, that's a very diverse topic in itself. Largely we've had very, very much the same type of use of force type training over the years. There's been the odd programs that come in, but I can definitely speak to the agency I've worked in. We've kind of rotated back to the same systems that we've used for decades, to be honest, and that's starting to change. So now what we're starting to see is looking to do a lot more research, looking into different methods of control, methods that might not rely on some of the systems that we used prior for a variety of reasons. Some of it is perception, some of it is injury, all the things that you talk about when you talk about training. And of course, we still have to balance that perception and those tactics with the needs of the membership rather out there. And I think in the agency I work in, and I think this is pretty consistent across Canada, we're seeing a great deal of firearms out on the street and the use of firearms by some of our criminals. And of course, you want to balance, and there's always the topic of militarization of police and some of the equipment that's used, but having to balance that with what do we need to protect our membership? And because of the firearms and some of the things that we're seeing, we have to have that ability. And I think that leads into the next kind of subtopic, but that's when we talk about communication. Are we doing our best to communicate to the public? Are we doing our best to communicate to city council, to commissions or police commissions rather, to decision makers on why we do what we do? One of the things that has been a very big interest of mine in every element of training that I do is the physiological responses and what causes us to act a certain way, respond a certain way under stress during use of force. And those are based on human responses. Those are not police responses. Yes, we use them, but again, there's a lot more to that, and there's science to that. Are we doing a good job on communicating that? And that's something that I know that is a challenge where I work. It's even a challenge in the private sector. The private sector, of course, gives you a little bit more leeway sometimes in that, you're not guided necessarily by a big organization, but the premise is still the same. Fighting misinformation. I mean, that's another huge thing that we're seeing, especially in use of force. And I know in Alberta, we have had to face that in both of our major cities. A significant use of force incident happens, and then misinformation is widely shared on social media platforms. And I know there's been a couple of comments earlier today from the recruiting side talking about social media, and that is how these younger generations communicate. So how are we going to deal with that? How can we combat that? How can we help when we train our members to understand that? And that's, I don't have an answer to that, but that's something that is definitely looked at and is something that we're fighting to move forward with. I do think, again, going back to the private sector, it allows, it is an easier platform to build bridges and to have relationships where with individuals who are, again, not sworn police officers. So you can start to build bridges, work on that communication. And I think that's quite huge. Just quickly, as kind of my last point, so the public safety aspect, the crowd management. And one of the things, both in the private sector and in the organization that I work, that, it's mentioned, and I talked in my bio about development for instructors, supervisors. Crowd management is a very, very, or a significant issue right now, in that we're seeing large protests, sometimes unrest. The Ottawa Freedom Convoy is a good example. They have another Rolling Thunder convoy rolling in this weekend. And we're starting to see it all over. We're seeing encampments from Halifax to Toronto to Edmonton and places all over the country. How we're dealing with that and the training that we're doing, and I can speak for the unit I work in and the organization I work in, is we're trying to get away from the old hats and bats riot team persona and onto crowd management. So being proactive, using the science behind crowd movements, crowd psychology, crowd dynamics, teaching our instructors from the ground level up, teaching our supervisors, teaching our commanders, ensuring that they are essentially becoming experts in that realm. And that way, when they do their decision making or use their processes to deal with these types of issues, we have a much greater chance at success. And in the private sector, the same thing. So when we talk about crowd awareness, the same types of principles are being taught to some of these organizations of peace officers, so that it's consistent all the way around, and that we're looking for that success without having to rely on significant use of force. Now, there's always the chance that happens, and we train for the worst case scenario, rather, quite often. However, again, we're trying to be proactive and trying to ensure that we're building that expertise and that leadership from the ground level up inside the teams to be successful. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stefan. Now we're going to hand it over to Michael McKenzie.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Or actually, it's afternoon now. Appreciate once again, thank Blue Line Expo for inviting us to participate in this discussion group. I think it's very fruitful and informative for us to share our ideas. As Brittany kind of laid out before, I have a pretty lengthy background in training, both in the military and the civilian world. So some of that passion I brought to the training section when I got assigned here. What I would like to do over the next several minutes is kind of discuss how we as the Orange County Sheriff's Office have approached training, specifically since the pandemic hit, which kind of highlighted some of our weaknesses in some areas that we needed to address. to ensure that our personnel were being trained properly in light of a lot of circumstances. One of the first things we had to evaluate our training in response to the community concerns after the George Floyd incident. That obviously sparked a lot of concern through our country, internationally, and we moved quickly to implement some de-escalation training and fair and impartial training for all of our sworn law enforcement officers to help try to reevaluate our training methods and make sure that we were getting the message out to our personnel on how we can de-escalate and approach our community properly, especially in light of a lot of the hate that was coming out of the George Floyd incident and the actions of the Minneapolis Police Department. We do conduct similar training to this, so this wasn't something out of the norm, but we decided to implement that immediately. The timeliness of this really reinforced our community's trust in what our agency's are doing, and that we didn't necessarily condone the actions of that police department involved in that incident. And that's really what it comes down to is building and maintaining the community's trust in our practices. I think being transparent to make sure that we're not trying to over or cover up or not tell anyone about what it is that we're doing, and kind of let them make the decision on their own based on the training we're providing. And I think that's been successful so far. We've had, as they have throughout the country, we've had civil unrest here in our own community. And I think the relationship that our agency has with the community has really minimized the effects of that. And it hasn't been as bad as it has in some other parts of the United States. Secondly, the pandemic, it really opened our eyes to creating innovative ways to get training done. Some of the challenges we had to prioritize how we could deliver our training safely. Our classroom training was canceled, severely reduced to promote social distancing. This obviously impacted our agency's training. Defensive tactics training was incredibly reduced or canceled due to close contacts. So a lot of the unknowns that COVID presented itself in the spring of 2019 really posed a lot of challenges of how close we could get to one another, and then what social distancing measures we needed to put in place to protect ourselves, especially from contracting the virus as well as spreading it. That pandemic pushed us to use other means to deliver training. We use a virtual system that's called Powered EMS. It's basically a virtual system that houses all of our policies and procedures. It also allows us the ability to create training programs and disseminate that through our entire agency in a variety of methods, whether it be a video presentation with a narrative with narration, or it could be through a PowerPoint presentation to accompany with a policy. And some of those have tests to at least validate some competency at the end of that. That's proved very successful for us. We've obviously grown as an agency, including more of these type of programs as we've moved along. Our basic recruit and training academy also had interesting challenges. It's FDLE, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, mandated that we were trying to find options to make up some of this training. Our training section oversees our in-service and our academy training, so it's a little bit unique that we deal with our full-time law enforcement officers, our full-time and part-time civilian employee staff, as well as our academy students who've yet to have been sworn in as law enforcement officers, and they're just attending their first phase of their training. The college that hosts our Criminal Justice Academy shut down with no plans of the academy returning, and that obviously can't happen in our profession. We need to continually hire, recruit, and train new police officers and put them through the training pipeline. And a delay in that process will obviously have a huge impact on our staffing, and it ultimately will affect the community that we all serve. So moving forward, I think we've had to find a balance using some innovation and tradition to chart the middle of the road. And the decision to bring our fair and impartial training was an example of this. We could arguably developed internally some training and argue that it may have brought more value, but bringing an outside entity into our agency to teach this not only brought an outside perspective, but it also created some more of the community trust that's so important in what we get done. We are constantly attending outside training from our agency, not just our leadership, but our line personnel. The reason that we go to outside training classes is to bring some of that knowledge, experience, and those relationships that are cultivated outside of here and bring them back into the agency and see where their application is applicable here. And those classes are very important for us to go through. And obviously now that COVID has started to, calm down a little bit, we've been able to send more of our personnel to some of these outside classes. And this is kind of what the importance of our training with our agency is not only relying on our internal resources to provide training at a level that's consistent with developing everyone, but we're also providing training from outside sources to help expand the knowledge base of everybody that we have. The worst thing that we can do as an agency and in the training environment is not to provide or allow for a variety of training to have a wider knowledge base that we can employ when we go out into the field, we deal with a community. Our deputies that work here should be far more equipped than maybe someone in a smaller agency that doesn't have as many resources to deal with different problems within the community. I think we've had some struggles internally trying to ensure that we have reached out and used the resources that we have available to us to provide us with insight and advice and guidance on what kind of training that we would see beneficial. Within the last 8 or 9 months, we've started to incorporate the use of electronic surveys, asking a variety of questions, seeking feedback on a variety of subjects to get buy-in from our line personnel that they have a say in what kind of training they want to see and what kind of training they want to have implemented here at our agency. And I think what that's done is just created a little bit of an ownership over the training and not just one person presenting a subject or an idea to a group of people, but the people actually attending these training sessions know that they've had a voice in what the curriculum is and what they would like to see, which gets buy-in. And ultimately, when people have buy-in, they tend to pay a little bit more attention and hopefully apply some of those principles as they walk out of here. One of the things, I know my major mentioned this earlier about investing in our deputies. And I know I've been part of the recruiting and background process before in my career. One of the things that we are able to use to get our newly hired deputies into our agency is that we have a variety of opportunities. We have a variety of assignments within our agency. So those opportunities itself are encouraging or enticing to someone that might want to seek employment with our agency. But furthermore, we try to highlight the amount of training that we will do on an annual basis, that we will regularly train in a variety of subjects, whether it's firearms or defensive tactics, that we have an ongoing and continuing education program here that allows our deputies not only one to get better, but to be proficient and ultimately be successful, move up in their career, and hopefully fall into these roles where they're now assuming those leadership positions where they're able to pass that knowledge and experience on to these younger deputies. And I think that's about all my time.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Michael. And last but not least, we will hear from Steve Nash.
Folks, certainly with the professionalism of the preceding speakers, I'll try my best not to let anyone down. So perhaps you can just let me know when you can see the PowerPoint slide. Let me try that again. Sorry for the delay. So as per the introduction earlier, I'm not the Steve Nash who plays basketball, but I am the Steve Nash who spent about 25 years in the Canadian military. And having had a medical retirement a number of years ago, I've spent a lot of my time since then retooling myself as a trainer and an educator so that I can support other teams to maximize their performance, et cetera. So as you see on here, my little company does the things that you see. And I suppose most importantly, what I try to do wherever I go is to add positive effect and to enable individuals and teams to increase their performance in a method that they declare is useful. And I suppose if we're really lucky, in a way that we can have some sort of validation of movement forward, if that makes sense. So I think I might not have very good answers, but I have a couple good questions, which is, how do you know that you know that you know? And what, so what, and now what? And I think they're directly related to the training aspects that each of the services, each of the individuals is considering. So I do believe, as you see on the slide, likely training is probably number 2 only to operational activities, the things that you do day to day with your services and your organizations out in front of citizens. And yet every day there's competing priorities. And it is these competing priorities that I think grind away the edges of where our training could be better, more successful, more useful, more relevant, according to different validation structures. And there's certainly a paradox of what can be shared and what is generally known to be true at certain levels of every organization. Use of force is one of my specialties over the last 35 years. In fact, I taught military unarmed combat for about 25 years. I've taught police law enforcement use of force for more than 20 years. I've done martial arts for more than 40 years. And my first master's degree thesis was on how to train people to win and survive in high stress engagements of violence. But even that idea, it's one of the reasons when I retired, I had to go back to university to get a bachelor and master's of education to understand how we learn, to understand how we transmit information. And for Mark's presentation right at the start, the idea of tacit and explicit learning and how things are transferred is so important, because there are some realities of how the human brain and the human body learn that is not common, but there's a lot of mythologies. At the same time, if we were to consider use of force, the paradox of what can be shared and what is generally known to be true, one of the ideas that worries me the most on behalf of not just law enforcement, but citizens in general, is an idea of defunding the police, which would in fact defund training. But then we would have an idea that if we let people train less and gave them less money, somehow they would be better at something we want them to be better at, which to me does not make linear logic sense. And I worry that it's a form of like sociological insanity. So this, to come to training, this idea of why are you training? Why are we doing this? Why are we spending money? Why do we have all our officers here? Why are we thinking about this or worrying about this for 1 second? One of the things that's certainly common in some of the training activities I've crossed paths with are the idea that, well, sometimes there's training so you can say you did training. It's mandatory. Everyone's got to do it. And one of the best examples of that might be for many services, many police forces, is shooting. So generally speaking, in Canada, a police officer will generally fire their service weapon in training once a year. Once a year. And yet we want them to be really good at it. And I might also suggest, and I don't have the exact statistics right now, but I did some research a number of years ago. If you think of the number of officers in Canada, of the tens of thousands of police officers, the numbers that are not current with their service weapon, they are overdue, or they have failed testing, is probably not less than 1 in 5. But that idea of what can be shared and what is known to be true becomes in, because if the chief or the training bureau of any organization presses that issue, then none of those officers can go on the street and do their job. And in the province of Ontario, according to OPP and provincial statistics, we can expect 1 in 5 to 1 in 4 police officers day to day to be getting paid but not coming into work because they are off on some sort of injury, some sort of stress. And I don't discredit any of that, except when it worries me that it's an invisible statistic. So that means your force just about any service, police service or law enforcement service, is probably under strength on every shift every day. And that is one of the competing priorities for training. Especially since in training, if you do real training, you can get hurt. In fact, because part of my previous roles in special operations were to train some of the world's best operators to go into ultra high stress, ultra violent situations time and time again and try to have them survive and win on behalf of the lawfully elected government of Canada. But there's a high cost that you have to pay up front for skill sets or even baseline ideas. And again, to go back to the previous presenters of how we learn and how we take these things into us. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is the ability to describe bona fide requirements and to be able to say them out loud in the light of day. If we consider high-profile cases in Canada, the US, things like the George Floyd case, like that took off and became a worldwide movement. Regardless of what some of the facts might have been and what some of the mythologies and some of the disinformation might have been. And the real challenge for law enforcement in countries like Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and many others is that we believe in openness and we believe in holding people accountable, which as a citizen I demand. But there are all kinds of real requirements and real understandings that are not easily shared because they make the public uncomfortable. And certainly in Canada, every police service is overseen by a police services board and by political entities. So if you consider in Ottawa, why the convoy was not dealt with faster, well, because the political impetus was not there, because in countries like Canada, the politicians, the lawfully elected folks actually tell the police what to do. And the police do their best every day, and you know more about that better than I do, to try and implement difficult things in the real world. And that's why training at the basis for this becomes so important. One of the words I worry the most about is cost effectiveness or efficiency in training. Because to me as a trainer, I know from my previous life in special operations, any corner that you cut in training, you will pay for in operations. So you can either pay up front and not be cost effective, because that just means saving money, and not be efficient, because that means instead of doing 40 hours of training, you do 30 hours of training, but rather to pay the price in the investment. And Michael talked about this a number of times, the investment in your most invaluable resource, which is your people. And I suppose one of the aspects that is most challenging for all of us, whether you're in the general public, in law enforcement, or somewhere in between, is some of the realities of learning. I'm presently in a doctorate of education program focused on leadership and innovation, but I don't know much, but one of the things that is repeated in the neurology, right, how the human brain literally learns, and in the highest and most recent educational research is human beings do not learn when things go well. We do not learn from success. We learn from failure. We learn from complexity. We learn from mistakes and errors. And yet, every police service probably represented in this community of practice that we're talking to here is likely told that failure is unacceptable. And I would agree as a citizen, I would like to have failure minimized out in the operational world, on the street, in the community. So that means very purposely, failure needs to be allowed to occur in training. If I consider training use of force or martial arts or shooting or any physical high performance activity, the easiest start point to improve behavior and physical, cognitive, emotional learning is to start from a failure. But if we allow failure to be failure to be failure, then we actually stop the learning and growth process because we're afraid of admitting that we didn't get it right. And I suppose the last thing that I'll share besides this thank you on the screen, is the idea that, you know, and I got this from a great educator a few years ago, is nobody's nerfect. You're not nerfect. I'm not nerfect. Our systems aren't nerfect. The law is not nerfect. And certainly human to human engagement under high stress, including violence, where people can get hurt or harmed, is highly imperfect. So to expect perfection, I don't even believe that practice makes perfect. I don't even believe that perfect practice makes perfect. What I believe is that training and practice can help you be better. And if you're really lucky, and if you really try hard and you think about it, you can have relevant training that coincidentally matches the coincidental live event that allows for the best possible outcome. So rather than bore you to tears, I'll close out with a thank you to everyone out there in this community. I used to be part of an apparatus that helped keep Canadians and their families and our allied friends safe. But now I'm just a grandfather and a civilian trying to support people who take on this difficult path. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Steve. Now, I do have some questions for our panelists. The first question is to everyone. It says, over the last few years, we have seen calls from the public to change police control tactics. Can you tell me about the rise in de-escalation tactics? I think we all kind of touched on it a little bit, but if you guys wanted to get into it a little bit more.
Yeah, you know what, I'll start, I guess. I think there's this misconception from some in the public that de-escalation is something that's almost new and that we haven't really done a great deal of in the past. And I can tell you from working with the agency I'm in, other agencies, the private sector, de-escalation and the ability to do everything you can before you use force is something that has been around for a long time. And the emphasis has always been there. The thing is that use of force is just more prevalent in how it's accessible on social media and the ability for people to see it. That didn't really happen before. But you know, you talk about training, and the more we're able to train, the more confident our people are going to be. And from what I've seen at an operational level, the more confident they are, the less likely they're going to use force, the more likely they're going to use their communication, and which leads to de-escalation. But, you know, another thing, when you talk about de-escalation, so we have all these less lethal systems now. A lot of agencies, of course, we have the taser, and different types of tasers. You have impact weapons, RWINs or things like that. And all of these different steps that are employed if communication doesn't work before we have to resort to lethal force. And there's all these systems that I don't think the public has a lot of knowledge on. But these types of practices have been going on for some time. So I think that goes back to the communication. Are we communicating the best that we can to the public to allow them to understand what we do and why we do it?
I would like to add something on this. And I think the statement of escalation, or I don't think so. I think that because of what Stephen just said, we need maybe to educate a little bit more the population. And yes, it is part of the work that we have to do. And very often, use of force is not something nice. It's not cosmetics. It's not about looking good. And we also have to address that, to explain why sometimes use of force is a way of the way of doing it and using it. It's always based on the minimum use of force as much as we can. And it's the way that our police officers in Canada are trained. But even if you have quite good training compared to other organizations, you always have to explain that. Sometimes when you just take a little bit of the, I would say, the video or the recording of an intervention, maybe it doesn't look good at the end of it, but you need the whole presentation of the intervention and the use of force. And I think that public organization that were, Steve said that les instances de surveillance that look at what we do. I think we're quite transparent about sharing those information, and we know that it's very complex on the street, and this is why you need to always educate and explain what you do, and a big part of it is about communication. But I do not agree with the term escalation. I do not agree with that. I think it's contrary to that. We try to be more with an approach which more inclusive and appropriate.
And if I could, I'd like to add on, a notion from a trainer, for anyone out there, if you have not been in a tussle with someone who is trying to kill you or smash your head in with a hammer, you may not understand, like, I don't want to be too over the top, but you may not understand the difficulty in engaging even one-on-one or three officers in one person, because a fight, violence is very special to human beings. It's part of our brain. And we might say in our society, because we have a great society, violence is never the answer. I would say it's seldom the answer, but as Tim Larkin, wrote in one of his great books, sometimes violence is the only answer. So if I'm going to defend my grandson, and previously my role on behalf of the lawfully elected government of Canada was to defend people with violence from those who could not defend themselves. And this idea, like the full spectrum of use of force, always includes communication, always includes officer presence, always suggests to de-escalate as soon as possible, to minimize risk and harm to everyone. But that is a baseline for all Canadian, all American, all sort of related police forces. But it's not the baseline for those who would fight with the police or those who would purposely break the law. And it's a skewed part in our brain of how this works. And I would go back to one of my comments from the presentation. The highest order of use of force that we show in media and in movies and in fiction is I can hurt you and you can hurt me. But that is by far not the highest. The highest order of training and application of use of force is no one is hurt. But that is so difficult. And most professional police officers, from the very minute they join, they agree that they are probably going to get hurt while they're trying to make sure the person they're fighting doesn't get hurt. And that is such an important quality. And it goes back to, and you probably talked about this in recruiting, but it's important in training. How do you validate that the person you have brought in your training is of good character and has good intentions? That doesn't mean things won't go wrong, but that means you found the very best person for your service. They are trying to help others, but it's hard to validate character and intent. It's easy to validate as a bystander what I saw in 7 seconds of video, even if I ignored the previous 35 minutes of video. So that idea of, that's why in training you have to pay up front. So if you only train in 20 hours, don't expect to be good at it. Like I said, I've done 40 years of certain training, 25 years, and I would be worried in any confrontation that I was going to get hurt. And I would be worried in any confrontation I was going to hurt someone else. It's totally normal. But in our society, as Mark is talking about and Stefan mentioned, it's difficult to share ideas of reality because people watch a lot of movies, a lot of X-Men, a lot of Marvel, and a lot of YouTube, which might not be telling them some of the realities of the challenges of professional law enforcement. And just I've been lucky enough in my military service to travel to, I've seen 50 or 60 countries and their police forces. And if you were in Canada, the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, France, if you're in one of those type of nations, trust me, you have the luxury of some of the best and most professional police officers on the planet Earth. How do you know? Because when they stop you, they say, "Excuse me, could I see your license, please? Excuse me, ma'am. Excuse me, sir. Thank you very much. Have a good day."
Awesome. And now I think we'll have just time for one more question. Michael, I believe it was you who mentioned using outside resources for training. For everyone, what new training tools are out there for police agencies to utilize?
I mean, you really got to look at your local and your state level agencies. A lot of people have developed training within our own communities that provide law enforcement officers with a different view of looking at things. One of the things we recently did as far as leadership focused training is that we've reached out to outside entities. Echelon Front is one that comes to mind, where they provide a level of leadership training that can be applied to our employees, both sworn and civilian, and accomplish the goal of developing and creating better leaders within this agency. I think leadership-based focused training has a lot to do with how well our people are trained. If we're focusing on developing our leaders and seeking out training outside of the agency for some of those trainings, it's going to help create a core group of people that will support and endorse the training that's being presented within our agency. So we do a lot of that. We reach out to other law enforcement agencies in the area that host classes. There's a lot of entities within the United States that put on training classes that are very useful: how to respond to critical incidents, how to respond to non-criminal barricades, which is a very hot subject as of late, where we're responding to a lot of mentally ill or people in crisis, and we have to know how to deal with those individuals, not just in the de-escalation concept, but a way to be able to communicate and resolve that situation and seek the treatment and the help that these people need. So we do look for a lot of trainings that are kind of focused around those things: the de-escalation stuff, the non-criminal barricades, people that need our assistance in crisis. And those are the kind of trainings that we're consistently and always putting our people through. Our crisis intervention trainings, another one, using our local mental health professionals in the area to come into the agency to train our deputies on how to deal with people in crisis. You don't know how to deal with people in crisis unless you're trained on how to deal with people in crisis. It's one of the tools that we as law enforcement officers tend to overlook, that we look past some of the mental health problems in our community and just assume a person's acting that way maliciously or purposefully, instead of, hey, maybe this person's in crisis, maybe a different tone or a different dialogue with that individual is going to de-escalate the situation and allow us to get them some of the help or some of the services they need. And we as a profession need to get a lot better at that, of identifying that. We don't have resources at least in the US anymore, where we had mental health facilities and we had hospitals where these people would be housed. They're now living on the streets. They're living in our community amongst us. Some of these people are homeless. Some of them aren't homeless, but they do survive, living on the fringe of society. However, they are very much in need of our help, and they need us to understand what they're going through so we can provide them with the help that they need.
If I may, just in 30 seconds to what Michael said, when you also need to be more, I would say, in a reality in your community, how can you work to do simulating call in the area where you work? So you, in this case, you can do major scene exercise, but you're going to go in your schools, in your hospital, places that you might meet in the reality when you answer calls. We do video analysis, case study. It takes process in case study. And it's very important also to do a lot of debriefing, so feedback about in reality when you do an emergency call and you have some kind of situation, to debrief together as a police officer on the field. Feedback is very important to learn from each other. So I think it's quite there. It's you only need the leadership to believe in it and give this opportunity to your people to learn.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mark. I think that's about all the time we have. So I just want to say thank you again to our panelists, Mark Parent, Sergeant Stefan Vachon-Zi, Lieutenant Michael McKenzie, and Steve Nash.